Hey NorCal Carters, this is Jason and I'm back with a basic video on bearings. So a lot of times we get the question, oh, what size bearings does this cart have? Or I'm looking for a bearing, but then the person looking for the part, they never tell you, I am looking for a 40 millimeter bearing, or I am looking for a 50 millimeter bearing. And what happens is it gets a little frustrating when you're trying to deal with people and they don't give you the measurements. So this video is tailored towards the brand new guy. So new guy, keep in mind there is no standard in go-karting. There's a lot of stuff that interchanges, but if you have a Tony kart and you're like on a Track Magic page, a lot of that stuff is not going to interchange. Bearings is a slight exception as long as you know what you have. So what you're going to need for this is a digital caliper. If you're working on your own kart, you need to buy a digital caliper. If you're not doing engine work, you can get a cheap digital caliper for $20 to $40. And you need to have one of these in your toolbox, because when you call your local shop, let's say you do have that Tony kart, call your local Tony kart dealer, look it up. Everyone has Google. And if you don't have Google, how are you watching this video? So Google it, Tony kart, kart shop, etc. And when you call them, say, hey Joe Bob, I got a Tony kart. It's green. But you're also going to, and then they're going to go, oh man, this is going to be a long phone call. Then what you want to do is like, I need a rear axle bearing. And the ID is 40 millimeters. So this one's measuring 39.9. But again, we're rounding up to the nearest whole millimeter for the bearing in this example. So that's a 40 millimeter ID bearing. The next thing that kart shop is going to need to know is the OD. And so this one's 79.93. Let's just call it 80. Okay? So you're going to write down 40 ID, 80 OD. ID, inside diameter. OD, outside diameter. The other thing that might be helpful, take two more measurements. Take the measurement of the width of the actual bearing race. That's the outer race. This one's 17.25. 18.1, so I got hung up somewhere. 18.1. So that's the outside race. Now the inside race is going to be, this might be a little bit more difficult for accuracy, but 33.93. So let's call it 34. So if you have those four numbers ready to go for your kart shop, they can help you a lot faster. The other thing, most bearings, let me try to not have a glare. There we go. Most bearings will have some sort of a number on it. And again, if you're watching this video, you probably have access to Google. So you could Google bearing space SB208ZZ. And in the bearing world, that is going to tell you exactly what kind of bearing this is. It's going to tell you what kind of covers are on it. It's going to tell you what type of balls are inside. So again, SB208ZZ. And this one here, it actually has a clearance on it. C4, that's the clearance. Check with your chassis manufacturer for the recommended rating, because that's a speed rating for the bearing. This one is actually made by JFK. Can you see that? JFK. C4 on the clearance, and the bearing part number is SB208ZZ. So the more information that you have, the easier it is to deal with the local shops, because now they understand they're working with someone that's done a little bit of homework. And if you're going to get into the sport of karting, you're going to have to do a lot of your own homework. Or option B, drop your cart off at a local shop, let them take care of everything. They're going to write you up a nice little invoice, maybe not so little invoice, and you can pick it up in a week and everything will be done and you can just go to the track. So option A, option B. So, but I find karting is a very, it's an attractant for a lot of do-it-yourselfers. So that's one example, again, on the bearing. The other thing, you can also do it the reverse way. I don't have the axle and I don't have the bearing cassettes in front of me, but you could also just measure the OD of the axle, which is the part that goes through this particular bearing, and you can measure the ID of the bearing cassette. And that might be enough information to help the local shop say, oh yeah, that's going to be a SB208ZZ bearing. We have those in stock. Now, when it comes to bearings, I have two bearings here. Kind of a budget, run-of-the-mill bearing, not so budget, very expensive bearing. So when you do these Google searches or eBay or whatever it is, not all bearings are created equal. And a perfect example of that is I bought some bearings from I'm not going to mention the name, but it was a cheap general bearing from an online parts supplier, and I got the bearings. And I installed the bearings, and then I noticed when I was tightening the set screw, it didn't tighten. I was like, what's going on there? I've never seen that before. So keep in mind, I went to the reputable site. I ordered the cheapest bearing available because I thought maybe they would have already pre-screened it or whatever. Went to go tighten it, and the set screw would not tighten. And I was, lack of a better term, I was pissed off because I was working on a customer's cart. I charged him to change the bearings because one of his bearings had failed. There was no way I could go back and charge him twice because I'm the one that supplied the bad part that was crappy quality. So don't necessarily think all bearings are created equal, because they are definitely not. But what ended up happening, it was two things. The threads that were in the race were not machined properly. So there was not enough thread gripping the set screw. And what had happened is it basically just pulled the slivers of threads that were in the inner race right out. And again, I was pretty upset because now I basically replaced this guy's axle twice, and I could only charge him for the one-time installation. And it was really a lesson to me that, okay, don't go with the cheap bearings. So do a little bit of research on the bearings. Also, what I would recommend is if you're dealing with a kart shop and you've had a good experience with said kart shop, try to give them your business first, because a lot of times the kart shops, they will have that knowledge, they will have that experience. And in my particular situation, I called up the online vendor and I said, hey, you know, Joe Bob, I bought these bearings, I need to send them back, and you need to be aware that this quality bearing, which a number of online kart shops sell that particular bearing, I go, you should probably pull it off your list, because without on further inspection, 2 of the 3 bearings that I had, either the threads on the inner race were not tapped properly, or the other issue on one of the bearings, when they put the set screws in, they had a set screw that had a very long taper. I'm going to try to get that in focus. There we go. It had a very long taper right here. And what was happening is that long taper only allowed for 1.5 to 2 threads to engage between the set screw and the inner race before it started to tighten on the axle. And on that particular bearing, I actually stripped out that last thread, and I was able to catch that one. And again, I called the supplier and said, get rid of those cheap bearings. It's not worth the aggravation. And you know what? It's a great supplier. They ended up pulling that product off the shelf. And I just said, send me the next level up a bearing. We're not talking about a high-end bearing that we needed. It wasn't for a national level kart. It was for a local guy that just wanted to go pound laps and needed something better than a broken bearing. So that is my quick 9-minute video on bearings. So there you have it. Again, digital caliper, measure, ID, OD, inner race width, outer race width. And then also, you have Google. Google is amazing when you have numbers and names. And if you know this is a bearing, you know this is a JFK bearing, you know it's a C4 clearance, and you know the part number is SB208ZZ. Thank you. If you found this video helpful, consider a donation to norcalkarters.com. You could also send us a direct payment. Every little bit helps, and as we do more videos, the production will get better, I promise you. The PayPal link is paypal.me/NorCalKarters. Thank you, and have a great day.